Hi, and welcome to the Critical and Close Studies video on writing the essay. This segment will be appropriate for Year 12 Advanced and Year 12 Standard English. So the first thing I have to tell you will come as a bit of a shock. There isn't just one core essay for this topic. In fact, there could be up to 5. So we're going to go through and look at the different core essays you should be preparing, and then how you might vary those a little bit in order to account for all of the different kinds of questions you can be asked in this huge module. So the first one is the most comfortable, familiar one. It's the universality essay. So this will ask you to talk about themes. It's often the first essay that your schools get you to write because they use this to test whether or not you have understood the themes that were in your text. So that gives you a kind of false sense of security that most questions are going to be about themes. But that's really not the case. This isn't the central kind of question that you're going to get asked in Module B. So keep in mind that this is the only kind of critical and close study question that is thematic. Even in a universality essay, you should be emphasizing text type structure and techniques, and often you're the one who has to realize this. It won't necessarily be laid out in the question. So you should be thinking about things like novel structure or dramatic technique, how you're going to focus on language, how you're going to bring up the ideas of characters and relationships and relate them back to the theme. The second type of essay you have to write is the textual integrity essay. This one's the major important essay that you have to write. This is really the core essay of the core essays. So it should also be the first essay that you write. In it, you're trying to prove that all of the different elements of the text work together to make a harmonious whole and create a text that is a classic. So you should discuss text type structure and genre, use of language, characterization and theme, and give each element one paragraph of its own. So unlike the other kind of essays that you've been used to writing where you tie everything together with talking about a theme, in this one you're going to be tying it together by talking about how each text has its own special elements that make it a classic. Relationships or characterization essay. So this is the third one you have to watch out for, and again it's a very different thing. It's where you focus on only one relationship or character and you evaluate its significance to the text as a whole. So you may get to choose the characters that you're looking at, or you might get to choose the relationship, but it may also be up to the essay question. So it's good to cover every relationship and every character just in case. Try and show a change in character or the relationships throughout the text. So in each paragraph, you want to maybe pick a different scene or a different part of the text where the character's relationship changes, and to try and show a change over time. Critical readings essays. So this kind of essay is often really badly neglected by students, and they often don't believe that it's something they really have to write. But it is still in the syllabus rubric, so you should still be prepared for it. This is the kind of essay where you're evaluating the text through a reading frame, so looking at like Marxist or feminist or something like that, or you're using critiques of productions and appropriations, or you're debating the opinions of literature critics that you have quoted. So usually your school will give you a big binder full of different essays by critics to look at. If they haven't done this, it might require a little bit of research on your own to come up with these critics. But rather than just quoting from your text like usual, a critical reading essay actually expects you to quote from other outside sources, usually academic sources. Keep in mind though, this is only for advanced students only. So when you're using critics, it's only for advanced. Standard students don't have to worry. But sometimes it can be useful to have a look at them even if you're not going to quote them. The final kind of essay is the reimagining essay, and this is another one specific to advanced. So this is where you justify the way that you would present the text or changes that you would make to the text were you the composer. So suppose they say, how would you rewrite Hamlet or The Merchant of Venice in Act 5 to give it a happy ending? Or what would you emphasize in a staging of Cloud Street, because of course it's been made into a play as well, to emphasize the idea of Australian identity? So they might ask a question like that, and you have to think about not only what is in the text, but how you would change what is there or promote certain ideas that are already inherent in the text. So again, this one is just for advanced. A really common type of question is to imagine that you're the director of the play, but they may ask you to do other rewritings or to think about other themes that you could put into the text as well. So, there are up to 5 core essays that you need to prepare for, not just one. And it's a beginner's mistake to try and turn every essay into a thematic essay. That's your comfort zone, that's what you're used to writing, but it's not what we want in critical study. If anything, it's best to try and turn everything into a textual integrity essay, where you're considering all of the individual elements of the text. So remember that the idea is that you're supposed to show what's special about that text and what has made it a classic. Start with those 5 core essays, but with this particular module, the amount of questions they can ask you are endless. They can ask anything they like, they can be as specific as they like, they can choose one particular quote or one particular passage or chapter, and they can focus your entire essay on this. Particularly with close study, they love to do this. So you're not going to survive this subject unless you can write an essay from scratch. It's great to start with the core essays, but keep in mind that by the time you get to trials, you should be able to write an essay on your own from the beginning. So in preparing your core essay, let's start with the textual integrity essay and think about how you're going to structure it. So the introduction is very similar to every other introduction. You name the text, you think about the year it was published and put that in brackets after it. You indicate genre, text type and composer of the text. Sometimes you want to be a little bit more emphatic about the genre, so you might give a little bit more detail about that than usual. Include relevant context, so the era it was made in and whether or not it's considered a classic text. Give a brief plot and theme outline in no more than half a sentence. So particularly with this module, you get used to finding what are the buzzword keywords. So particular phrases like Jacobean, Renaissance, revenge, tragedy, all those sorts of things. And you can usually give a pretty good idea and outline of what you're talking about with just a handful of keywords. Signpost the main textual integrity elements, which will be your topic sentences. So you're going to talk about language, iambic pentameter, dramatic characterization, dramatic irony, camera shots or themes. So you should be quite specific about that and introduce them in order. Address the question using some keywords from the question and your thesis to answer it. Your thesis should justify why you can consider this text a classic. Keep in mind with the keywords that some teachers will tell you to come up with a synonym for the keyword and not to use it directly. That's probably not a good idea in something as specific as Module B. So you want to use exactly the word from the question and make sure that it's really clear to everyone exactly what you're talking about. If you're using critics' readings, you don't need to include them as though they were an additional material in the introduction. You do what we call in-text referencing. So when you get to the part that you want to talk about critics, you'll bring up the name of the critic, the date that the critic's essay was written, and the name of the essay if it has a name, and then you'll provide the quote from them. But you can just do that in the body of the text, you don't need to do it in the introduction. The first body paragraph. So this is again where critical and close studies gets a little bit different from the other essays that you've looked at. In the first body paragraph, it's not just like part of your argument, it usually sets the stage for what you're going to talk about. So it's almost like a second introduction in a way, only you will be doing state explain support throughout the first paragraph. So this paragraph might fulfill a variety of functions. If you're doing a suite of poetry, you might spend the first paragraph discussing the poetry suite as a whole. So if you're looking at Gwen Harwood, you might be talking about what all of her poetry reflects. Or if you're looking at Kenneth Slessor, you might be thinking about modernism and how that impacted him and the fact that he's a unique Australian modernist. So you might say a little bit about that. A little bit of history or context might encroach on this particular paragraph. You're going to talk about the techniques or themes which are universally used by these poets and think about their style. So if we were talking about Gwen Harwood, we might talk about things like natural imagery, cycles of life and death, an emphasis on music. So you might say sort of generically a couple of the ideas that crop up in her works again and again. If you're studying a classic text, productions and appropriations, you want to spend the first paragraph focusing on the structure and language techniques of the original text. So if you're doing, say, Hamlet, and you're going to talk about different appropriations of it, before you go there, you want to spend some time really talking about that original text. And because when you're looking at productions and appropriations, language is so important, it's probably good to really study the original language of the text. So yeah, make sure you use plenty of original quotes. Don't just sort of give us an overview of the text and then move into the productions and appropriations. They really don't like that. So if neither of those kinds of first paragraphs suit what you're writing about, you should spend the first paragraph speaking broadly about the text, commenting on its importance or influence on history and culture. So where does it fit? How did it influence people? How did people respond to it? These sorts of questions might be answered in your first paragraph. It's also good to discuss genre or text type conventions here. So you may wish to start talking about the 5-act structure if you're doing a Shakespeare, or you might discuss genre and think about how those conventions are used or not used particularly in your text. Regardless of which method suits your text, don't neglect to state explain support. So in this first paragraph, every idea that you come up with should be supported by textual evidence. So again, you should always be referencing your text. So because it is a little bit like an introduction, there's a tendency to talk about the text, but not to actually quote from the text. Try and avoid that tendency. In ordering your paragraphs as a general rule, you're going to move from the broad to the specific. So you have to think about the major ideas in the text, so the main characters, the major themes, the major arc of the structure, but then you're going to focus in on some very narrow ideas and have a really close focus. So try and make sure that you move in a logical, smooth way from the broad to the specific. In the other body paragraphs, each of the structural aspects that you signposted in the introduction is now going to get its own paragraph in order. So if you talked about structure, language, character, relationship, and theme, then you're going to do it in that order. When choosing structural aspects, don't talk about everything and don't talk about things if you have no idea what to say about them. Saying it has a structure is not interesting. You want to say it has a 5-act structure because it intensifies the sense of tragedy or something like that. So pick the most important or unusual aspects responsible for making it a classic. Yes, it's using iambic pentameter maybe, but why is it doing it and what special effect does it have? What effects do dramatic technique have? Why has the setting been put like this in a particular modern play? So make sure you're not just saying it is like that, you're saying why it is like that. In your topic sentence, explain very clearly what the aspect you're discussing is and outline what is important or unusual about it. Give 2 or 3 good examples of this aspect at work in the text via state explain support. And don't forget to mention the techniques along with the quotes. Point out what this aspect achieves, so good characterization might make the audience personally connect to the text. Be sure to point out any inverted genre conventions or the impacts of context on this aspect, or any special text type techniques. So if you're doing a film, you know you have to talk about things like camera angles, camera shots, and diegetic sound. Make commentary about how important this aspect is to the text's success. If you could take it away and nothing would change, well then why are you talking about it in the first place? So it has to be something really important to making the text interesting or making it stand the test of time. In your conclusion sentence, use keywords from the question and reiterate your thesis. And in the conclusion, you want to use the keywords from the question again and your thesis so that you've really answered the question and talked about why the text might be considered a classic or why it might stand the test of time. State how well structured the text is, and of course if it focuses on textual integrity or universality, you want to address those ideas as well. Explain the importance of your text as an example of its text type or genre. So remember, all of these texts were chosen for a reason. They were obviously standouts in their category, so you want to show that you understand this. Explain what important message it has for the audience. So I mean, there may be many themes in your text, but what's the major, from your point of view, most important theme that the text has to offer? Give a mature comment on the value of the text or of this strong message for society. And always when you finish your conclusions, you want to leave your marker with something deep to think about. So you want them to go, that was really well phrased and really eloquent. What a mature student. That should be the last thing they think about you when they finish your essay. So again, standard students can relax here. Critical readings are only used for advanced. If you're required to use a critical reading in your essay, there's a certain way that you integrate it into your passage. So a critic will usually focus on one small idea or minority perspective of the text, so Marxism, feminism, post-colonialism, something like that. A fresh point of view that hasn't been used a lot. When discussing critics, don't forget to link their ideas back to the big picture. So critics will focus on small little details, and you can too to a certain extent, but you must always keep the big picture in mind as well. The role of a critic is to interpret the text and to judge its value. So they might say really horrible things about your text, or they might rave about how wonderful it is. Make sure that when you're using the critic, you're using one that's appropriate to your essay question. So if the text is saying that, violence is bad, and the critic is saying violence is good, well, then you might think about that when you come to answer the question. Who are you going to side with and why? If your question is on language, and the critic that you talked about is talking about themes or something, it's also not appropriate to use them out of desperation. So often people get into the situation where they only know 2 or 3 critics, and so they can only trot out the same critics' responses over and over again. But you need to know enough critics that you can respond to any situation. So yeah, 2 or 3 probably won't cut it. It's probably good to know of 10 critics that talk about your text, and maybe to have memorized your 2 or 3 favorites with a couple of other quotes put on a list somewhere in case you need them. Give each critic their own paragraph, critiquing the validity of their views as you go. Provide your opinion before the conclusion sentence. So you want to talk about, say, the aspect, maybe they're talking about language. So you might say language in the skin of a lion, then you might have the critic talking about in the skin of the lion's language, and then you might talk about what the critic said and what you think of in the skin of a lion's language. So you're going to order it like that, and make sure that your opinion's not just an echo of the critic. You have to be original, and you have to stand out from the crowd a little bit. If you're required to use productions and appropriations, you need to think a little bit about how you're going to put that on the page as well. They should only be discussed after you've explored the original text in depth. And so you probably want to give maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs to the original text and then bring up a new paragraph for each appropriation you want to talk about. You should mention the changes that the new composer has made to the original and what new meaning they're trying to emphasize. So if the characters were all dressed in red and had blood smeared on their faces, why was that? If it was really dark and moody and shadowy, why was that? So think about particularly things like setting, costume, and what has been omitted or cut from the original text. Feel free to critique the composer's interpretation of the original text. So sometimes it's great to talk about a composer that you really think nailed the original production. Sometimes it's good to talk about someone who you think did a terrible job, because then you can have a really strong opinion and critique what they're saying as well. You might also wish to comment upon how much the original text was compromised in order to make this production. So, did they get rid of all of the language and start again? Did they use sock puppets? What did they do that made it very, very different? So if you're thinking it's far too far away and the text has been really compromised, it's an appropriation rather than a production. So that's the structure that you're going to use for creating your textual integrity essay. Now you have to think about how you're going to get better at the process of writing it. So you have to write the 3 to 5 core essays, the universality essay where you think about 2 or more themes, the textual integrity essay where you think about things like structure, language and characterization, the characterization essay where you consider a character or a relationship, the critical readings essay where you think about feminism, Marxism or particular critics' opinions, and the reimagining essay where you might have to think about how you're going to change the ending of a particular text. You're also going to write an essay for every character and every relationship combination possible, because as we said, you may not be the one who gets to pick who you're going to talk about. Write an essay for every possible theme, not just the ones that you enjoy talking about. So most people get on a roll and they just focus on their particular theme and they're always arguing about that. But it's very likely that you won't get to choose the theme that you talk about. They'll probably be quite specific in the question, and if that's all you've prepared, well then you're going to walk in with nothing. Practice widely varied essay questions, including format essays. Keep in mind that on top of all this other horrible stuff that we make you do, you may have to write this essay as a speech, or a letter to the editor, or a feature article. So it's a good idea to think about those kinds of questions as well. You should be doing at least one timed critical or close study essay per week from now until the HSC. This is a really big module, and it's not going to be done when your school says it's done. You're going to have to keep working on it right up until the HSC. You can get essay questions to practice from Prime's online question library, or you can look up HSC past papers. That's the end of this lesson. If you feel like you need more help, come and visit us at www.primeeducation.com.au.